Hello and welcome. This is Jack Butler, and this stream is Political Differences Are Killing My Relationship. Help. So this is going to be helpful for any of you that are having issues in a relationship that's intimate, in a relationship that's with family, in a relationship that is with a coworker. If you have found that political and cultural difference is killing that relationship or creating a lot of pain, distance, avoidance, hiding of your truth, perhaps there's people you felt you've had to cut out of your life, any and all of that, this video is going to be useful. If you are here live, welcome. Say so in the chat. Let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you're watching this after the event, thank you also for being here. I will get to all the comments, so still leave me a comment. And I also just wanted to let you know I have opened enrollment for 2026 coaching. So if you're interested in working with me more deeply on this issue or other issues that relate to you claiming your power, being more of your true self, bringing more authenticity into how you relate, I would love to explore that with you. You can book a free consult with me. Let's see if the technology works. Ooh, there we go. Yes, you can go on my Calendly and snag a slot. And if there's not one there that works for you, then you can use the contact form of my website, drop me a note, and we'll find something that works. So political differences are killing my relationship. I know this is painful territory. We are in holiday season. For some of you, this may have been a difficult thing that came up with Thanksgiving, spending time with family across the political divide. But also for a lot of you, this is an issue where you're looking at your partner, your boyfriend, your husband, your long-term lover, and you're like, I don't like a lot of what I'm hearing from this person. So hang in there. I think I've got some ideas in this stream that can help you. And if you have an experience or question that you want to share, stick that in the comments as well. And I will look forward to seeing if I can get that answered. So I'm going to riff on this for a little bit, and then we'll see if there's any live Q&A. And the first thing I want to say about this is, even if it doesn't feel like it in this moment, this is a very powerful orientation that you can stand in your life, is to imagine there is something here that is important to my development. There is something here that's important to my development. And you don't have to know in this moment what that is. And it may even sound ridiculous to you. You may think, well, hang on a minute. I'm dealing with a crazy person here, and you're asking me to see if this is something that can work in my development. I'm saying yes. Nearly always in life, there is something on our side of the fence that we can learn. And the more you stand in that, the more you prime your brain and being to notice what opportunities for growth may exist. And oftentimes it's hardest to do that when you literally have zero idea. I'm going to throw a few ideas out in case they may get you thinking. One possibility is you are learning how to navigate your own boundaries, right? So it might be that this is offering you an opportunity to say, hang on a minute, I'm actually not available for this conversation in this moment, right? There may be a time and a place that works for you to talk politics, but you don't just want to drift unconsciously into that conversation. So perhaps this is offering you an opportunity to work on stating what you need, stating what you want, stating what your preferences are, and actually being willing to disengage and maybe even go to a different room or just call a timeout to say, hey, I'm a bit maxed in this conversation right now. Let's see if we can return to it at another opportunity, right? So one is, this could be an opportunity for you to work on some boundaries. The second thing is, this could be an opportunity for you to grow your compassion, right? And you might think, well, look, I'm a pretty compassionate person, and I know many of you in this community are. There's different types of compassion, right? The compassion that you might have for a child that's sick, or a dog that's cute, or someone who's clearly suffering on the other side of the world, that's great. That's just a different type of compassion than the compassion that you might be able to grow for someone that currently you don't really understand. And at times you might even be thinking negative things about, right? That's a much harder person for you to accept than it is for someone who's, clearly suffering, or who's innocent, or who can't talk back to you. So what if you frame this as some kind of opportunity to grow your compassion in directions that you maybe haven't yet grown in, right? You might be a super compassionate person when it comes to your work. Perhaps you're a healer or a helper in some way. You might be a compassionate person. You're taking soup to the next door neighbor. You look after people when they're sick. You're always friendly. Fill in the blanks. And none of this is to diminish that. That's awesome. Keep at that. This might just be a slightly different vector of your development to say, learning how to be compassionate with people we disagree with, or perhaps even more than disagree with, or actually finding uncomfortable, unfathomable. That's a different kind of compassion. And you may have to learn how to suspend judgment and see if you can stay longer in curiosity. And we're not going for perfect with this, right? This doesn't mean you have to sit down for 3 hours and dive deep into this person's, psychology and political beliefs. It might be that you can just grow the capacity to be with this person for a few more minutes in this style of conversation. And that's actually progress right now. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're not looking for perfect practice. We're just looking for a direction of travel. Hey, welcome. Some of you have just joined us. If you are new here and live, feel free to drop me a comment. If you're watching this after the event, please also leave a comment if you have experience or a question in this area. We're talking about political differences are killing my relationship. If you're having issues with someone, it could be an intimate relationship. It could be a familial relationship. It could be a good friend, could be a work colleague, could be a neighbor. This stuff is currently endemic. And I happen to believe that no one's going to come save us from this, meaning it's actually going to be on us to dig deep, do some work, get curious, drop our judgments, deepen our acceptance of one another across difference. And I'm framing this to you as an opportunity for your own growth and leadership development if you're willing to step into it. And it can also be really hard. So I'm not missing that as well. Sometimes the hardest development is with the people that are closest to us, because they can sometimes be the deepest triggers because they're the strongest attachments. And also sometimes you don't get a rest from it, right? If this is your next door neighbor or the person that works in the next cubicle or the person that you share intimate space with, this could be happening always already. So I have compassion for that. This could be a harder path of development. Normally when development's harder, it's also faster, right? Meaning life might be offering you the difficult, but also faster path to your own growth. The other possible opportunity that I will throw out here for you is to grow your values development. Now, that's kind of fancy phrasing, but it basically means most of the time, most of us are stuck in a particular worldview and a particular set of values. And this could be your opportunity to say, you know what, this human being in front of me that I happen to know well and maybe care about, perhaps they are in right now some different values and some different worldview. And that worldview might be quite different from mine. It's easy for most of us, most of the time, to want to impose our values on other people, right? Because if you really dig into it, most people think their values are right or better. And everyone lives in a value system, right? So we can't all be right about that. And this is more of an opportunity to think of values as shades on a palette, or maybe a better metaphor is like different parts of the orchestra. Right. So it might be that your values are very much string instrument values, but you're actually dealing with someone who's in a completely different instrument, and what they are paying attention to, how they are making meaning, what they value deep down is actually just kind of different than you. And learning how to be with those people in a different way might be the thing that pushes your edge of development. And you may have a view, which again, I think I had this, and maybe most of us do if we haven't examined it, that my values are kind of right and they may be better. And I'm here to invite the possibility that your values aren't the end of history, right? There was a famous book written by Francis Fukuyama in the late 80s that we had to study at political science when I was in college. And it was basically the end of history. And the idea was, democracy is won. That's the best. That's the end of history. There's no more development. And in some ways, there's a kind of lack of humility or even a mild hubris to that, right? To think, oh, my values are the best values and there's no other values that could be different or better. This is to say, okay, cool, you've got your values, but this person has a different set of values. Do they have a right to their values? Do they have a right to the experiences that have informed those values? Of course, it's easier to relate with people when we have the same bedrock of values. That might be true. And you might be saying, well, do I actually really want to relate with this person? But this is an opportunity for you to actually notice perhaps the limitation of your values, right? So for instance, if you really value empathy, that's a great value. Yes, to empathy. We want more empathy. We want more empathy for all sorts of people. And life is offering you an opportunity right now to have more empathy for the person in front of you that you know or love and who has a different set of values or political ideas than you. In a way, what this is offering is a chance for people to have a right to their autonomy and for you to have a right to your autonomy. If you just go back to super basic, rights that develop literally in the toddler or the emerging child, and a right to autonomy. And many of us have a kind of violation in that right? Meaning we don't always find it easy to say me, mine, I want, I need. What if just maybe someone has a right to the autonomy to think what they want to think? And you learning how to be less judgmental or less reactive to that will actually benefit you, not just in this relationship, not just in relating with other people where a difference exists, but it will also benefit you in your own self-acceptance and self-love, because you're being less reactive and you're moving into curiosity. There might be parts of yourself or actions and behaviors that you engage in that you sometimes think, why am I doing that? That's not very good. And you run a pattern of self-criticism. The more you can create space for someone else to think or feel something different than you, the more you might also create space for yourself to be a little bit less on your back and to cut yourself some slack when you're having a difficult day, or you didn't make the best decision, or you didn't show up the way that you wanted to show up. Welcome if you're just joining us. We're talking about political differences. Political differences are killing my relationship. If you have had an issue in your relationship, whether intimate, familial, work, or otherwise, that has to do with politics, I'm trying to give you some ideas as to how this might supercharge your growth, or at least help you create more ease and presence in your relationship. I studied for a long time in the Integral community in Boulder in Colorado. And one of the reasons I did that was because it started to help me make more sense of more people. And so it got my attention. I had been a bit of a personal development junkie. I'd been to all sorts of seminars and modes of learning and communities of practice. And some of them would kind of resonate and some of them kind of wouldn't. And then when I discovered the integral worldview, it was like, okay, these are all kind of part of the full texture of expression and being human and making meaning. That's great. Now I've got a little bit more of a map. And one of the precepts of integral thinking is this idea of something being true but partial, right? Which can sound a bit philosophical, but it's basically saying, for you and for me, when we say something, normally it's going to have some truth in it, but it's going to be partial. It's not going to be the whole picture. Even if you and I are at the same dinner, what you and I might say about that dinner is probably going to be something true, but also partial. We're not on the inside of everyone's experiences. Memories are fallible. My experience is subjective. So it's my experience. So the more that you can get, you're dealing with the subjectivity, you're the uniqueness of another human being, the easier it might be for you to be with that kind of difference. The real key, if we just boil this all down, is learning how to see something good in the foundation of something that you don't understand. One of the things that can help with this is what we call moral foundations. And it's a theory. You don't necessarily have to go study it at length. But it basically says nearly all the time people are operating within a moral system. It's just they might be activating moral taste buds, is the way that Jonathan Haidt talks about this in the book, The Righteous Mind, that people have different moral taste buds, right? So you're kind of hypnotized to a certain thing, right? Which could be empathy. It could be fairness. It could be equity. And again, that's great. We want to keep that. But someone else might be hypnotized to loyalty or authority or sanctity, or what they call liberty from oppression. Don't tell me what to do. I don't want people telling me what to do. That is a form of moral awareness. It's just a different taste bud, right? So in the same way, if you only like bitter food and I keep feeding you ice cream, the person over here that has a taste bud that gets activated by sweet things is like, wow, this is great. But you're like, I don't even like this, and it's not meeting my needs. It's not hitting my taste buds in the way that I want. So even just opening up to the possibility that there's a lot to learn about moral development, and your worldview or my worldview is not the end of moral history, right? It's not the be all and the end all. So anytime I hear people say, well, this is moral and this is immoral, mostly what I hear is you have a moral code and you're now using that to impose on other people as if they should have that same moral code. Now, there might be some basic things that we can all agree with, right? Like don't go killing people. We can probably all agree with that. But when it comes to anything that's more nuanced, people might be getting activated in different moral foundations. So the very thing that you think is wonderful and fair for someone else, they might not care yet that it's wonderful and fair because they're stuck on a different moral foundation. They're looking from a different perspective. They are valuing something different. So this is where we talk about growing your values development. It's almost like, yeah, you've got a sweet palate and you might be really good at that, right? Or you might be able to eat lots of sweet food and that's not a problem for you. But for someone else, they've actually got this other thing, like until the salt craving is fulfilled, they don't really care about ice cream, right? That's very much like a cherry on a cake, but they don't have a cake. They need something else. They need the salt first, right? In the same way that bodies might need different things, people might need different things morally. And when you view it like an orchestra, the benefit of that is like, oh, we're all needed, right? We actually need people to be playing in different registers, to be using different instruments, to be valuing different things. That's sort of part of the holistic nature of society. It's difficult when you're in relationship with someone because you're probably going to have the experience like, I don't get you, I'm not really liking you, and probably this is going to be quick in behind, I trust you less, right? When I hear you saying XYZ, right? Or when I hear you saying this, about pick your favorite politician, right? When I hear you saying this about Joe Biden, or when I hear you saying this about Donald Trump, or when I hear you saying this about immigrants, or when I hear you saying fill in the blank, what's actually happening is I'm trusting you less. But even if you could say that, right, that is a subjective experience, right? You're an authority on that. I notice I'm trusting you less. That's not actually saying you're wrong, you're bad, you're immoral, you shouldn't think that, you shouldn't say that. It's actually keeping you in your lane and saying, what is happening over here? So the other thing that often happens when any of us is on a moral crusade is we get way over there, right? Because we're convinced of our being right, right? Said differently, we're righteous, right? We're convinced that we're right. And now we care more often about being right than we do about being in rapport, right? Or being in connection with the other person. Now, being in connection across difference is difficult. So this isn't to say this is just a, kind of a one-trick pony and you're good to go. No, this is practice, and some of it is hard, and some of it you might have the faith, need to have the faith or the patience to stick at it before you see results. But just creating that space of curiosity, like, oh, maybe this person is actually moving to the beat of a drum that I don't even hear, and wow, what could it offer to me to get into that world? Well, probably they're not the only person that you're going to meet that has that drum beat that they can hear that for you is kind of either distant or doesn't even register at all. And wouldn't it be great if they could also do the same for you, right? So ideally, this would be some kind of two-way street, but not everyone is equally as good at doing this. And if you're having the issue and this could supercharge your growth, then you might want to take it on and offer some kind of leadership from your side. So I'm curious if this is making sense. If you've just joined us, welcome. We're talking about political differences and how they might be killing your relationship. We're talking about what you can do to turn that around, what you can do to use that as grist to the mill of your own development, which is something we like to do on this channel and in this line of work. And I'm also letting you know that I have opened up enrollment for coaching in 2026. And there are slots available still. So if you're interested, you can book a free consult with me. That's the scrolling link across here. And I will also put it in the description beneath this video. Just go and candidly find a slot. And if there's not a slot there that works, go to the contact form on my website, drop me a note, and we'll see if we can still fit you in somewhere. So this is political differences. This is the issue of our time, is it not? Right? So you might be listening to this right now and thinking, well, actually, it would be lovely to have a relationship. I don't have a relationship. But you may notice that this is still something that comes up, perhaps with work colleagues, perhaps with neighbors, perhaps with family, right? We've just had Thanksgiving here in the US. We're going to be going into the Christmas holidays. For some of you, this is going to be on your mind. This is going to be a thing that maybe stops you having the Christmas holiday love, community, unity experience that you want. And here's what you might notice. Most people don't need you always to agree with them. Most people do want the experience of feeling heard. So part of your practice here, we're not saying you need to agree with someone. We're not saying you need to value the same things in the same ways that they do. But you might be able to create a space where you can hear them with suspending judgment, where your practice is, I'm just trying to take you in. I'm just trying to hear and receive what you can say. And one test of this is, can you actually play back what someone is saying to you and it makes sense, right? Can you actually grok what they're saying? Or are you too over here in your own reactivity that you're kind of shutting down in your listening? Right now, if you're triggered, it's going to be difficult to listen. And that might be the place to own, hey, I'm actually activated. I'm triggered right now. And I notice I'm not really listening very well. That's authenticity. That's leaning into what's really happening. That is normally a step in the right direction. But if you shift the listening, sometimes it shifts the dynamic, even if the other person isn't doing anything different, that they are no longer fighting you. Anytime that we're kind of fighting, right? We're fighting for power in the relationship. We're fighting to be heard. We're fighting for our own survival. We're fighting for our own values. That's going to be difficult for someone to give you the more nuanced and moderate version of perhaps what they think, right? So the danger if you can't create some sort of space that another person can talk into is you actually don't really find out what they really think. Now, you might be thinking, gosh, I've heard enough already. I don't really want to know. I'm saying that at its worst, that is a kind of individual level cultural imperialism, right? That, hey, my values are better than yours. My morals are better than yours. You shouldn't think this. You shouldn't believe that. You shouldn't feel this. You shouldn't act like that. That's a whole load of you, right? Now, you might have the highest level of values and moral development of any human being ever. I mean, it's possible, but it's probably not likely. And if we can just create that little bit of space for curiosity and acceptance, then you might realize, well, hey, actually, what does it take to be in relationship with another human being? And particularly a human being that thinks things that on the face of it, they sound kind of bad, wrong, or immoral to me, right? I'm just saying you're in an operating system. The more conscious you can become of your operating system, the easier it might be for you to become aware of someone else's operating system, which have these things we're calling moral foundations, which have these things we're calling values or a value system. And let's just be blunt. Mostly you and I didn't choose our value system, right? It's not like you and I have been, working with a coach or a community of practice for 10 years to say, how do I get the highest level of values development possible? Mostly your values chose you, right? Or maybe they got forged in a community, or maybe they got forged in your upbringing. Now you might be proud of them. You might have great values, but it's easy to imagine that you've maybe done more for them than you actually have, right? To some extent, our values have us just as much as we have our values. And what I've noticed, and myself, this would be true, a lot of us have a list of what I would call aspirational values, right? Hey, what are your values? Well, my values are love and adventure and kindness and uniqueness, spontaneity, passion, right? Now, that might be true. You might be an incredibly passionate, spontaneous, unique kind of person, right? Great. All the power to you. That's awesome. That sounds great. And sometimes when we're activated, when we're triggered, when we're tired, when we're stressed, when we're financially crunched, what is actually running how we're operating, how we're communicating, how we're making decisions is something else, right? This might be, what happens when you're on holiday, right? Or this might be what happens on the weekend. But in the day-to-day, you might have other things that are kind of running you anyway, right? So said differently, it's hard to have complete consciousness about what is actually driving us a lot of the time anyway. We might have some ideas, some fantasy in some way about that, but in real sobriety, gosh, I think it's hard sometimes to know exactly. It's not like everything you go through your day. Well, I did that because of this. And I sat down and I thought, well, that value is up further in my values hierarchy than this value. And that's why I'm going to prioritize that. No, you might be an incredibly deep and thoughtful person. And again, all the power to you. That's awesome. You can probably be a teacher for a lot of us. I'm just trying to bring a little bit of sobriety, right? That oftentimes you might say a thing, want a thing, or get activated in a certain way, not with a huge amount of reflection and introspection, but just because that's kind of the moral taste buds that you were given or developed, and that's how reality is hitting you. Now, someone else is having a different experience. Just like it would be strange if you came to my dinner party and I said, oh, you've got a sweet tooth? Oh, I'm not sure that's going to work, because around here we really value bitterness, as that's the highest value, and then saltiness. So this might not be right. Now I could say, hey, we're going to have a dinner party and the majority of food is going to be bitter and salty. So if you've really got a sweet tooth, this might not be the best fit for you. That's a different thing though. But if I'm just judging you and dismissing and rejecting you off the bat because you have a different taste bud than I do, that would be a little bit strange, right? That, in a sense, I believe is possibly what we're doing when people have different values and we kind of dismiss them, is we're kind of saying, you don't really have a right to a value system that's different than mine. And you might be implicitly saying, I think my value system is superior and yours is inferior. And I'm going to say, as someone who, it's been a minute, but, I had to study some of the moral development literature and, social psychology, Piaget, etc. I mean, this stuff is complex. And most people who are confident in their moral judgments have not studied moral development. So they might have a very limited understanding of how they actually got to where they are. What's the deep meaning making that they're giving their life and other people? So if any time you feel completely convicted that you're morally right, I'm just going to throw it out there that you might be a little limited in your deeper understanding of this topic, and it might actually be a lid on your own development, right? Because you think you're fully cooked morally, but the literature seems to suggest that there's stages of moral development. In the same way that Piaget did a lot of work with children to find out, oh, actually, typically a 5-year-old plays a different type of game than a 10-year-old, than a 15-year-old, because different stages of moral development often come online. Well, stages of development don't just stop. There's actually the potential for more stages of development in adulthood, right? So if you took nothing else from what I'm saying right now, just a little bit of curiosity that maybe you're not fully baked morally, maybe I'm not. And maybe if there's stages of development, you could learn to be more literate with stages of development that aren't the dominant way that you understand your moral code, right? So said differently, you might have politically a progressive value system, right? Progressives generally are big on equity, on fairness, and on care. So generally things that have a social justice orientation are activating for them. We should do that. We should care more. You should lead with empathy. These are great values. Someone that has a traditional value system is unlikely to lead with those things. They're going to be more concerned about order and decency and honor and tradition, right? They're a different set of things. So if your social justice idea immediately hits at a tradition that I think is an important part of our culture, that's going to be difficult for me. And if you're now judging me as morally inferior because I'm actually trying to protect or preserve something that to me is morally important, now we're in a difficult place, right? No one tends to bring their best game when they're feeling judged, right? So if you could do nothing else, then be authentic about what you believe and think, but to try to just get curious, like, is someone else getting activated with a different taste bud that maybe I don't have as a strong thing, right? Just like, I mean, if you're using this literal experience, I've had a lot of issues with, sinuses, sinus-like migraines, facial pain, etc. So there's some situations where I know if the barometric pressure changes, I'm going to feel that pain. Sometimes it's toothache, sometimes it's forehead pain. Now, most people don't have that, and they don't necessarily know what that experience is like, right? But it doesn't benefit me to assume that you should be having that experience or that I shouldn't be having this experience. It's generally better if we can just be in rapport with reality, right? So I'm inviting you to be more in rapport with another person by not leading with you shouldn't think that way, you shouldn't operate that way. It's actually like, let me understand. Let me get curious. What are you valuing when you say that, right? What are you valuing when you say that you think we've had too many immigrants? What are you actually valuing? Let me get curious, right? It might not just be you're a bad person and you're anti and you don't care enough. That's me judging you through my values. What are you actually valuing? What are you valuing? Are you trying to value keeping things the same? Are you trying to value making sure that what you liked in your childhood is somehow preserved? Is this something about cultural similarity? What's actually going on here? That creates a little bit more space. And generally, here's the kicker. You like yourself more when you're not in judgment of other people. Yeah, it can feel good to be righteous. It can. But I don't think it actually feels as good sustainably as feeling loving and accepting. So I think most of us prefer it when we can not have to reject people and not have to cut them out of our life, right? And the literature on this seems to suggest that, cutting a parent out is actually harder on the parent generally than it is on the person that's doing the cutting out. Now, you might say, well, look, I've had so many violations and transgressions of my values, and that's difficult, right? And sometimes you might need to get some space from something. I'm just going to suggest that's a little different than doing the permanent cutout move. And if you don't have to do that, that's generally going to be better for them, and it's probably going to be better for you, right? Unless this is something that's abusive. But if it's actually really a difference of values or a difference of political ideas, this is the work that we need to do, right? If we're not going to go down the path of continuing low-grade civic inflammation, some kind of normalization of political violence, it seems, in the States that we're already kind of here. Countries that kind of don't really want to be together, right? Rather than sort of saying, hey, maybe we have something to learn from each other, because the thing that you value and the thing that I value are different, right? I'll give you a different example. I've been an entrepreneur before, right? Entrepreneurs are difficult to be with sometimes because they have a vision they're running towards, right? They're sort of on the top of the mountain going, wow, isn't it cool up here? And you might be further down the mountain. You're not seeing that perspective, but you're like deep in the operations or the marketing or the product. And sometimes there's a tension there because you're valuing different things. You're seeing different things. And if you can find a way to work together, generally you can do more, right? And entrepreneurs without teams don't generally get a lot done because we can't just be all vision on this, right? So you think of something like Myers-Briggs. Myers-Briggs, what is it really? Coming out of Jungian psychology, it's 4 main polarities: extroversion, introversion. If you're an extrovert, you don't want to be in the world in a way that makes introverts wrong, right? Or vice versa. You might, as an extrovert, think the culture might benefit from a little bit more introversion, or maybe as an introvert, you notice your edge is to be a bit more extroverted. Sometimes it serves you. Maybe that's a rounding out or something. But if we're generally just like, well, really, the world should be more introverted or should be more extroverted, that's unlikely to create the best thing. Now, something like that might be obvious to you. But if I said, well, the world is better when there's people with both progressive and traditional values, that might not make sense to you right now. And I'm not actually saying I'm 100% right about that. I'm just putting that in your reality as an idea that maybe we're actually stronger when there's some people holding down on certain things and some people holding down on certain other things. And sometimes there's a big tension there, but learning how to be with that in a way that doesn't make other people wrong can be good. Similar example, similar example in a business context. You've probably heard of doing a SWOT analysis, right? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Some people are naturally more likely to see opportunities, and some people are likely more naturally to see threats. If you can combine both those things, you're probably going to have a better SWOT analysis. You're probably going to have a better business. But if I'm someone that sees opportunities and I treat you as someone who sees threats, and I kind of say, gosh, you're always so negative, pessimistic, you always just see the problems. You always just see the risks. You're so cautious. I'm missing the value that you might bring to the party. Now, it might be true that occasionally I'm saying, hey, I notice you're really doubling down on this stuff. And in this conversation, it would actually benefit me if we could be in a bit more of a blue sky possibility space. That's framing, right? That's actually inviting something. That's saying, can we have an agreement about what this conversation is? It's different if I just reject the value that you bring to the table, right? And so normally what this is pointing to is a limitation in my own development, right? Now, I'm not saying that everything that is good for your own individual development is always the best business strategy, right? Clearly, there's some people who are very, quote, successful in business who don't necessarily have a particularly balanced or integrated development. I think these are different things. But here we're typically talking about your development, and your development is generally more true and full when you can include more perspectives. And this might be what it's getting pointed to. So let me just jump over here to the comments. Different political views can affect the relationship in a very negative way. However, it's still possible to do it and realize the politicians use techniques to cause polarity. Yeah, I think there's probably evidence that at the level of the political class, let's say, there is more polarity, divisiveness than there is necessarily amongst the people. And I don't just blame the politicians for that. I think some of that is the systemic incentives, like the way that we have set the system up, or we haven't yet found a better way to reconfigure the system. It's actually one of the weaknesses, I think, of electoral politics. Everything's kind of driven to this: you've got to win an election, you got to win another election. That's a different thing than, oh, how do we come together to find solutions in the interest of the community or the country? So we might want to be in the conversation about designing a system that prioritizes people that have those skills more than people that have the skills to win elections. Most people really don't know the difference between left, right, conservative, socialist, and so it's good to talk to each other, try to understand what is the partner trying to defend and why. Yeah, sometimes the tension is so high, couples separate when a part of political differences, they make a food couple. Not quite sure I fully understood that, but yeah, no, this stuff is high stakes, and clearly there are people who are, leaving relationships, intimate or otherwise, because this is going on. And I think if we can all do our own part to practice that might be what's being called for in these times, because I don't think the political system necessarily is going to sort this for us. This might be kind of on us, person to person, community level, relationship by relationship, trying to find some better ways of proceeding. Sometimes political difference can also make a good couple. Yeah, I mean, I think if you can find yourself across those differences, or sometimes agree to disagree, I think what it takes to agree to disagree is not thinking negatively of the other person, right? And in fancy speak, they call this lowering a negative affect, right? Lowering negative views about another person. And the good thing is, if you have someone in your family or someone in a relationship with, you will likely have evidence of good things that this person's done, right? Ways that they've maybe showed up for you, great times that you've had together, or the continuity of a relationship through time. So that might be something that you can lean on to say, well, look, actually, I know this is a good person, or I know this person has showed up for me. So maybe I don't have to make this the only thing that I'm seeing them through. Or maybe I can say, well, look, if I have a belief that this is a good person, then it might follow that some of the things that they're trying to say to me are actually the communications of a good person. They might just be in values and moral foundations that I'm not very conversant with. So I can't actually metabolize the value. I can't actually value the value that they're creating, because it's almost like a language I can't yet hear, right? Just like if you started to talk Greek to me, I couldn't really get much value from that, because I would have no idea what's going on. But, if you're speaking in French, I'd have a decent idea what's going on. And I might be able to say, oh, yeah, thank you. I appreciate you saying that, right? So this is almost like we're speaking love languages, right? We're speaking moral languages. And in the same, love languages, there's 5 of them. Moral foundations theory, there's, I think, 6 of them. I think they added a 6th. I've run through some of them. So people who tend to be more moderate or conservative tend to have more moral foundations in what they call authority, right? So they're more willing to go with what an authority figure says, right? And you might not have the same authority figures, right? So authority figure for them might be, a leading Democrat politician. Well, you don't like Democrat politicians. It might be a leading Republican politician, or it might be a priest, or someone who's a spiritual leader, perhaps in a faith or path that you're not part of. But for them, if that person says something, that matters, right? Because they give authority to that person. One of the main moral foundations I think people struggle to understand is loyalty, right? Loyalty is about loyalty to the in-group. Now, it gets a bit contentious. Well, who is the in-group, right? But even if you think of it at the most basic level, for a lot of people, they have a little bit of an in-group, often with their partner, right? Or they have an in-group with their family, right? So you might be willing to stand by someone in your family when they do something or screw up in a way that you might not be willing to do for someone that's outside your family, right? Because you've got deep history, because you've got blood, all these things. And you can just take that out, whatever level of tribe, right? If you identify with, your church community, or your work community, or the bicycling community, or your ethnic community, or your linguistic community, or your national community, or the global community, or fill in the blanks. But you might find that other people are doing things that you think, well, look, that you're noticing how they're hurting other people, but you might not be noticing how they're also being loyal to their in-group. Now, you might say, well, yeah, but I'm a global citizen. I don't see any in and out. I want everyone universally involved. Well, that's a beautiful vision. The reality is most people aren't yet living that way. And so we might need to get sober about the reality that you're dealing with. Most people feel some kind of loyalty. Often people feel loyalty to people more than they do even to ideas. I think this is actually one of the kind of almost current risks when everyone says, well, it's about the Constitution. And yeah, love constitutional governance, all about that. I think the US Constitution is an amazing document. And, it may need a little bit of updating or some easier ways to get some amendments possibly. But when the chips are down, how many people have loyalty to a document versus people they feel loyal to? I'm not sure. I think for most people, there is a loyalty that they feel to other people, either based upon similarity. We're part of the same group, tribe, community. We've depended upon each other for our survival or for our growth or success. These things are meaningful, right? I study social psychology. You can look at some of the classic experiments in social psychology, like the Zimbardo prisoner experiment. You might have seen that there's a movie about this. So I'll put this link down below, but basically people tend to favor their in-groups. So that's my main point here. All righty. Well, I got a wrap here. I've got a knock at the door. Good to be with you. I'm going to say this one more time. Check out the free consult. If that's a good fit for you, it'll be the first link in this description. And I look forward to reading the comments if you're here after the event. All right. Thank you very much. Bye for now.